today. For those who have maybe joined us for the first time, my name is Fraser Collins. I look after business development and partnerships here at Trueman Change. So delighted to have you all with us today. I'm joined by Lucy, as always, who is founder of Trueman Change and organisational psychologist. Before we start and just get into it, I just want to cover a couple of things. If you want to ask any questions at all, as always, please just drop them into the chat or put your hand up and feel free to cut in at any point. We will have an open chance at the end of the call for you to ask questions. But please just, it is always interactive, so please just pitch in. We will be recording the session, as always, so I will send out a recording either today or maybe Monday at the latest. So if you need to share or you want to share with any colleagues, then please feel free to do that. If you need to duck out or if you want to refer back, then you will have the recording there. So without further ado, obviously the session today is on culture and why culture matters when merging. And it's one of those things everyone knows matters, culture, but it's often the bit that gets left behind while things like structure and processes, finance, governance, that type of stuff, and timelines take over. And that's usually where the real issues start. So today is a chance to kind of step back a bit and look at what's actually going on underneath the surface during times of merger and change. And more importantly, what you can do maybe do about that as leaders, managers, looking after teams as part of your organisation. So we'll keep it practical and grounded in what's really happening out there. So let's just crack on and start. And my first question, Lucy, would be to you. We hear the phrase "culture eats strategy" for breakfast a lot. I know I use that phrase. We use it sometimes in various ways, but why does culture matter so much when organisations merge?
Thank you, Fraser. I would argue that culture matters regardless of whether organisations are merging or not. Culture matters when you're going through business as usual time. It matters when you're going through significant change and transformation. I think what is interesting about organisations coming together is that you have a kind of additional pressure on culture there. Whenever you've got merging situations, whether that's LGR, whether that's public-private, whether that's services that are outsourced that are coming back in-house, when you've got people kind of transitioning from one organisation to another, what it creates is a period of time, and it's normally fairly protracted. So I'm sure there'll be people on the call that are going through local government reorganisation at the moment. Although it's very rushed in terms of the amount of time to get it done, the amount of time that staff are going to be living with uncertainty is quite a lot. So you've got this kind of period of a maximum amount of uncertainty. And I've been having this conversation a lot recently. It has almost a disproportionate impact from a psychology point of view, because if you think about changing something to do with your work, so say, for example, the organisation that you worked in decided everybody needed different laptops with a different operating system, maybe you were going from like Windows to Mac or something, that would be something that would be a real pain and it would really disrupt your day-to-day work. But it would be something that you would feel irritated and frustrated by. When we're talking about organisational mergers, we're talking about change that happens at a much deeper level. So people often have a sense of identity with their organisation, so they will identify with the place that they work. People really value their relationships, whereas those are kind of being messed up. So you're going to be working with new people who you don't already know. There's going to be power issues because people are kind of, this is what my team is now, and now it's not going to be that team. So that creates a certain amount of behaviour. So when you put all of that together, and also your sense of purpose, it can mess with your sense of purpose. So a lot of people, particularly in local government where we do most of our work, their sense of purpose is really connected with their place and their community that they're working for. I know that there's talk of significant mergers happening in the police force at the moment, which again, that's a very place-based service delivery model. So you've got police officers that know their place, that know their area. So when you put all of that together, it has this almost disproportionate impact on us psychologically, because we know from the research that change about how you work is a pain and people will resist that, but change that impacts your sense of purpose, your identity and your relationship hits much deeper. And the other thing that's kind of contradictory about these kind of mergers is that often people that have been through them describe this sense that on day one very little practical change happens. So if you're a leader going through this kind of change at the moment, you're going to have to deal with really quite heightened emotions and people being anxious about this, when actually on day one, for the majority of people in the organisation, not much will change. The change will happen gradually. The change will happen particularly with your senior leaders. They may be hit by the change first. There will be changes around, how corporate services are run and so on. But in terms of a massive change to your day-to-day, that's unlikely to happen immediately because of a merger. So you then get this protracted period of time and almost this anticlimax to it. So the reason why culture matters in all that is because culture is about the experience of work. It's about how we experience the workplace. So that's why these kind of things really impact, because they're impacting it on a much deeper level than perhaps just, the change of a process or the change of an IT system, if that makes sense.
Okay. So you mentioned identity there a couple of times.
Yeah.
And in the work we do as well, there's a lot of identity mentioned. What do people mean, do you think, when they say this doesn't feel like my organisation anymore? And we hear people saying that quite a lot. What do you think that means?
So I'll answer that from a kind of academic level, and I'll talk about the what the research tells us about our sense of identity, but I'll also talk about it in a more practical level. So at an academic level, when we research the sense of organisational identity, basically it differs for different people. So if you were to ask a room full of people, and I won't ask you guys because I know you don't all know each other, but if you were to ask a room full of people, what do you do for a living? And that question was asked like in a social environment, in a party, not in a professional environment, what do you do for a living? People actually answer that question in different ways. So some people will say, if we use councils for the example, some people will say, I work for such and such a council. Some people might say, I am a comms professional in local government. So what they're showing there is one of them is identifying with the brand of an organisation or possibly the place, and the other person is identifying with a sense of profession. So you see this a lot with doctors, for example. If you ask a doctor what they do for a living, they will answer not by which hospital they work at. They tend to answer by saying, I'm a doctor. Social workers are the same. So you've got these differences in whether people identify with a brand. Brand is quite high in retail. So somebody would say, I work for John Lewis. So they associate with the brand because a lot of investment has gone on in the brand. With local government, it's mixed. So you have a lot of people where it's the profession, but you also have a lot of people where it is about the sense of place. And the other thing that hits in local government is a lot of councils are institutions that have been around for a long time and almost can inadvertently become family businesses, in a sense that, there are a lot of people that work in local government, that the parents worked in local government or the cousin works in local government. So you get this kind of real community feel there. And then you also get people that are very, very closely identified with what they actually do in local government and very closely identified with a place. So you probably have a high proportion of people that live and work in the place that they serve, and that's similar with other public sector organisations as well. So this sense of identity can mean different things to different people. What we know from research is what I said in response to the previous question. When we are dealing with change that impacts our sense of identity, it hits much deeper. So we use our sense of identity to make sense of ourselves. And remember, this is a tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle. So, people might identify with being a wife, a mother, a sister, somebody that's got a particular hobby that might be part of their identity. So all these things fit together like a puzzle piece, and they go quite deep in terms of our psyche. So in terms of a practical basis, what it means is when you are going through a merger of some kind, you are tapping tapping into that sense of identity and you're changing it. Now, for some people, that might not matter because their sense of identity is about their profession, not not their place of work. For some people, it really, really matters. So it then triggers this kind of, well, that's not who I am. That's not what I bought into. That's not what we're about, which all massively impacts. When you add on top of that this sense of the whole organisation is changing, we don't know who's going to be leading us anymore, we don't know what the people that we're merging with are going to be like, it really heightens all of this kind of sense of anxiety about it. So that's why identity is important.
So I noted down something there about why culture clashes happen even within with similar councils and similar cultures during merger. I mean, I guess for LGR, we're working with councils, cross council within one area or with individuals. And something we do here is, and I've heard, is our cultures are quite similar. So if that is the case, and if that's people's view, or if it is indeed the case, why do you think we still see some kind of friction? Why is there still cultural friction there?
So because those changes are not those similarities are not always read, they're not always visible. So when we look at culture, we look at it at three levels. So we really subscribe at Trueman Change to the Edgar Schein view of organisational culture, and there's three levels to it. So the first level is the espoused culture. So this is an example of where things appear to be very similar. So if you walk around and look at, my expertise is public sector, not private sector. I imagine this is similar in private sector. It might not be. But if you look and you pick one sector, so if we were to pick local government, if you went and just did a quick research piece around what the espoused values, so what are the things that councils say they value, what are they? They're probably quite similar. So the things that are on the posters, the values that are on the wall, the things that we're trying to achieve, our mission, they're probably quite similar. And yet the cultures underneath that can be very, very different. And I say that as somebody that works with lots and lots of different organisations. So the level one is what we say the culture is, what the organisation says the culture is. Level two is called artifacts. And artifacts are the things that the staff say and do and see. So that can be behaviour, that can be the systems that we use. So we might say that our culture is we're really innovative, but our IT systems might be really clunky and difficult to make it innovate. So the artifacts are what staff say and what they see. But then underneath that is a layer called underlying assumptions. Now the underlying assumptions is where the magic really happens when it comes to culture change, and they're not always obvious. So two organisations can look fairly similar, but when you get into those underlying assumptions, they're actually quite different. And underlying assumptions, and I'm sure we'll talk about some specific examples shortly, but they are often about deeply held views on how we manage risk, what our sense of identity is, how we behave, how much we value people, and that kind of stuff is not that easy to see. Once you know how to use that model and you know how to kind of draw it out of people, and if you've got a bit of experience around culture and psychology, then you can absolutely draw it out. But no two organisations are the same, I would say. You do have some that are similar and you have some that are completely on opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet their espoused culture and values will look very similar. So it's about really digging under the surface and asking yourself, what are the deep beliefs and assumptions that the staff in that organisation, and it is about the staff, it's not about the leaders, what are the staff carrying that they believe to be true about that organisation? That is what culture is. So when you are putting people together from different organisations and those beliefs differ, that's when clashes happen.
Thank you. That makes sense. So when your expertise is culture reviews, we do that as a business, and we're doing that just now with organisations. When you're reviewing culture within an organisation, what are you really looking at?
So we follow a methodology where we basically need to hear from staff. So we do the espoused bit is quite easy to do. That's like a desktop exercise. You know, what are the values? What's the workforce strategy? What's the council trying to achieve? So we do that. That's quite easy to do. The bit about the artifacts, which then lead us to the translation of the underlying assumptions, we have to speak to staff. So we have a bit of a guidance where we try and speak to roughly at least 10% of the workforce of the organisation. We don't need to speak to much more than that, because what you do find is you get repetition quite a lot. Where you need to speak to more is if there's a particular trust issue in the organisation, because you don't want people to feel like they didn't have the chance to contribute. However, from a research point of view, we don't need to speak to loads and loads of people. And what we do is we ask very big open questions around 3 pillars. So those pillars are the behaviours. So we ask people, tell me what behaviours you see when you walk around, when you're on your Teams meetings, what are you seeing? Are people happy? Are people stressed? What's going on? We ask questions like, a really good question to pull out of behaviours is what happens on a bad day? You know, are people upset? Are people withdrawn? Are people banding together? Tell us what happens on a bad day. So we ask really big open questions. The second pillar is about systems and processes, because as I said before, if your systems and processes don't align with what you're trying to achieve in terms of your espoused culture, the culture that you're trying to build, then they will contradict. So there we ask, how do decisions get made? You know, what are meetings like? We ask, what systems have you got, and do they help you or do they hinder you? And all the time we're listening to what staff say. It's a very qualitative piece of work. And then the final pillar of the types of questions we ask are around symbols, which sounds a little bit woo-woo, and I know some people do struggle with it, but there are things that happen in organisations that are very symbolic. So what phrases do you hear over and over again? So an example of that might be, we did, it was not technically a merger, but bringing in-house of services for a housing service, and the phrase that we kept hearing all the time in those sessions were, everybody's leaving. When we looked at it, actually about 3 or 4 people had left. They were just very vocal about it, and the general staff turnover was very, very low. It was much lower than industry average. But you can see how, because it keeps being said, it then forms part of the kind of underlying belief system of the organisation. So we ask about how meetings is another good question. I know we can ask that under either of the pillars, but how do meetings run tells us a bit about symbolism. We can ask questions around, you know, what are you seeing over and over again? What are you hearing over and over again? And we can draw out of people what it means to them. So they are the 3 that we really focus on. And then what we do is we take that away and we really analyse, well, what does that mean? What are people really talking about there? Because they're not necessarily talking about this particular system is annoying. What we pick up on is where they say, and I can't move forward, or I'm stuck, or this is frustrating. So it's worth... We have a framework for answering those, for asking the right questions, and then really it's about the taking away from that, doing that qualitative analysis and identifying that meaning below. We do have a question in the chat, Fraser, from Jessica, but I don't know if I answered it earlier, because the question is, do you still... particular professions that are more likely to identify with their profession than their organisation? So I don't have any hard facts on that, but I think that so social workers, you do get it. You do get social workers will say, I'm a social worker. They don't tend to say which authority they work for. Doctors absolutely say it. With corporate services, it's more mixed. So somebody might say, I'm an accountant, or they might say, I work for the council. It is quite mixed. I would say it's probably the professions, but this is not scientific. This is just my observation anecdotally. It's probably the professions where people have had to do a lot to get into the profession, because that means that they're forming that sense of identity before they get a job. So if you are a lawyer, you've had to go to law school, you've had to do either the bar or your LPC. Is it LPC? I can't remember what it is, the legal qualification. But you've had to do a lot before you actually walk into an organisation and get a job. So that sense of identity forms before you go to work. Where people are they get a job and then they develop in that job, they can often identify more with the organisation that they're in, if that makes sense. Thank you. I've seen your comment, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. So say right, bringing things to life even more. Then I know you gave some examples there, but further examples of cultural issues that you've seen in mergers. Some real examples within organisations. Can you share any of them, Lucy?
Yeah, of course. So we've done quite a lot of culture work recently, and it is my favourite type of work because I think it's really powerful. I think if you get it right and you really get to that level of depth, it's really powerful. So some practical examples of having gone through exactly that process that I just said, run loads of workshops, drew that information out, we look at the topics of what people are saying, then we do that interpretive analysis. So one of them was a local authority, and this was quite a sad one actually because it was a really lovely assumption. So the assumption was that we are the best. We're the best council in our area. We're performing the best financially. We're performing the best on various kind of metrics. We are the best. We're better than everybody else. I used to work somewhere else and it was rubbish, and now I work here and it's better because it's the best. Now, normally, under normal circumstances, that's a really lovely culture to have built because we're tapping into people's sense of purpose, we're tapping into people's sense of pride. However, in their context, they were about to go through local government reorganisation. So we've had to talk to them about how they tamper some of that and temper it down a little bit, because if they are approaching that merger, and I know it's not technically a merger, it's technically a new organisation, but from a psychology point of view, it is a bunch of people from a small number of organisations coming together. If they go into that with the energy of we're better than everybody else, you can see how that is going to create conflict and create a toxic new culture once they get past that vesting day. So that's a really good example. We've had an example of an organisation that was post-merger, and the assumption that they were carrying was it's not fair. And that came out in various ways, which is why you do that interpretive piece, not just the topic. So it's not fair because people are on different paying conditions. It's not fair because people have different leadership styles. So my boss lets me do this, but their boss doesn't let them do this. It's not fair because we're all in different buildings and the buildings are all different and they've got better chairs than us. It's not fair for a variety of reasons. So this had become a real kind of deeply held assumption. And again, you can see how what that does is it means people are exceptionally sensitive to fairness. Now, we're all very sensitive to fairness. I often joke and say, we're all toddlers wandering around the workplace shouting about it's not fair. There's lots and lots of research in the world of psychology about how important organisational justice is. So when you are going through something where you are bringing people together and they are likely to compare like for like, it is going to trigger that fairness issue. So what that organisation is doing is working very, very much on how do we kind of bring fairness in, how do we level the playing field, how do we really prioritise these key symbolic things that people perceive as not fair, in all the usual challenging situations that local authorities are in and having to struggle with that. And the final one, which I think is a real warning to people that are going through different types of mergers, is there was two actually. There was one that was post LGR and one that was bringing a service in-house, that both shared this same assumption, and that is we are stuck. So we're stuck, we're very disempowered, we can't make change happen, we're just stuck. And from a psychology point of view, it's actually really understandable that people were in that place, because what they're doing is they're waiting to see for a long period of time. So this is back to what I said at the beginning, that these types of projects and programs, they take a long time to come to fruition. So as soon as you think it might be happening, people sort of lean back a little bit. Oh, well, we'll wait and see how this plays out, and there's no point of spending money on that IT system because we'll wait and see what happens after the merger, and we'll just not recruit to that post because by the time we've merged we'll have to do a restructure anyway. And so all these little decisions, which are totally valid in the moment, add up over time, and what they create is this sense of stagnancy. And then what's difficult is, as I said at the beginning, there is all this emotional kind of work on, we're merging, what does that mean to our identity? What does that mean to our relationships and our place of work? But the actual merging happen is quite the anticlimax. And a lot of the run up to it is getting the behind the scenes stuff right. So is it legal? Is it constitutional? Is it safe? Have we got our processes right and our legal stuff right and our decision making right? Those things are very important, but they don't impact the day to day of most of the staff. So then you get to your go live point, and now all the staff are like, well, we've been worrying about this for the last 18 months, 2 years, and nothing's really happened. It's fallen a bit flat, and I've still not got my new IT system, and I still can't operate this, and I still can't make a decision about this, and I've still not recruited to this post. So then you've got to flip that culture from a wait and see culture and get it into a ramp up and make stuff happen culture. And that's really, really challenging. So what we're doing with that organisation, well, there were two different organisations. So one of them, we did a lot of work with the staff where we kind of invented little project teams. Invented sounds like we made it up. We created little project teams and we got them working on fairly small but hard-hitting issues that impacted their work day to day. So, you know, that IT system isn't very good. So what is the workaround? Perceived as small business improvement projects, but what it did was it shifted the culture massively, because now the staff have got evidence of, oh, we tried to make a change and it happened and we were involved in it and we were able to lead it. So it's created a massive shift. The other organisation was still fairly new in there in terms of we've only just completed the review, but I'm basically recommending the same things. We need to create quick wins and quick change that might not be your big massive stuff that you need to do. Let your corporate teams handle the big stuff that you need to do, but let your staff handle, give them that empowerment back, get them to a place where they're making practical change happen quickly. So they're just some examples, but it is genuinely very varied, and you know, which is why I say that there aren't councils that are, or organisations that are totally alike, because we do find different assumptions in different places. So yeah, hope that helps.
Thanks. There's a couple of messages there about the echo we're getting. We are conscious of that, guys. I don't know why that's happening when I speak, but yeah, Lucy will mute when I'm talking. So from a excuse me, from a leadership point of view, and I guess there'll be different types of leaders who are maybe more attuned to what culture is going on in an organisation compared to others, and different thoughts on importance of doing culture work, that kind of thing, and being aware of culture. But what do you feel, what do you see, and what do you think leaders often underestimate when it comes to culture in mergers?
I think that they do underestimate everything that I said in response to the first question, which, to be fair to them, I did. You know, until I really got into, you know, the depth of research and understanding what culture is. I also underestimated these things, because I'm quite a practical person, and so would look at, well, you know, is it that, and I quite like change as well. So, you know, I would minimise change and be like, well, it's just a bit, you know, wait and see and it'll be all right. But when you look at it through that lens of what is normal in the workplace and what matters to us, then it really does shine a light on that. So I think that they underestimate, you know, how important identity is to people. And it's difficult because it's also one of those things that even if you've been through it, you forget afterwards. So, you know, you forget afterwards that how difficult it was to go through it, because once your identity aligns, then your focus is on moving forward. But that process of realignment is really, really tough. So I think leaders do massively underestimate that work. I think also we're guilty of assuming, first of all, that we don't have as much power over culture. People think of culture as this magic, like pink fairy dust fluffiness in the air that is completely uncontrollable. That isn't true at all. And if we look at it through that lens of, right, what are these underlying assumptions that people are carrying, and how can we almost disprove them? You know, if you need to realign culture, then you've got to prove that you are fair and you're not stuck. And there is a concept called cultural latency, which is where there is a delay, because once that belief is held quite deeply that, for example, something isn't fair, that individual needs to see a number of occasions of that being proven wrong. They're not just going to see one fair thing and be like, oh, maybe it all is fair now. So it does take time. So it doesn't happen overnight. But leaders that understand it have much more power and influence over culture than perhaps they think they do. So I think they make a mistake of being passive about it. I think that they make a mistake of assuming that it will just sort itself out. It doesn't just sort itself out. And the more you allow that stagnancy to stay, the deeper it goes, which means the longer it will take to sort out. So I think that that's challenging. And I also think people overestimate communications. I'm sorry if I offend any comms professionals on the call there with that. Although, to be fair, the comms professionals I know would agree with me that we think that the answer is the espoused stuff. And so then we just focus on whether it's we're a caring council or we really value residents. I live in Lancashire, where the phrase very often, I don't know if it still is because I'm not working with Lancashire at the moment, but Lancashire's a place where everyone matters. You know, we have these like slogans that we pummel with that do matter because you need your espoused bit. But if your espoused culture and what you're saying isn't backed up by your artifacts, by your systems, by your behaviours, by your processes, by the symbols, then they will not reach that underlying assumption level. So if you think of it in those three tiers, good cultures is where those three tiers align. And I think a mistake that people often make is focusing very much on the corporate messaging. And finally, I think that we focus a lot of culture. I was with a council last week and we were going through a culture review, and somebody that was on, and this is like the very senior point of the council, rightly raised the fact that it's a privilege to have the time and headspace and, you know, access to expertise to be able to have these quite deep conversations. The average frontline manager does not have that. So most managers in the organisation don't have a clear understanding of what culture is. They don't have an understanding of, you know, how you can shift it. And that's not a criticism of them, it's a criticism of organisations, because I think we focus a lot of manager development on how do you have a difficult conversation, how do you manage your budget. It's very sort of practical management layer conversations. I think the maturity of organisational leaders around culture is very, very mixed. It has improved a lot in the last few years, I would say. I feel like about 5 years ago I was twittering alone in a dark room about culture and people weren't really taking me on, and now I feel like people are realising it, probably because we've all been through a significant change and transformation programme that's just fallen flat and not landed and blamed the culture. So I think people are starting to see the importance of it. But it's really important to have managers and leaders in the organisation that do have some understanding of this. They don't need to be as much of a geek as I am, but they do need to have some understanding of the concept of these different layers and messaging, because you can have the best comms team in the world putting out the best posters and values and so on. If the individuals in the organisation, we all know people join an organisation but you leave a manager. So if your line manager is not demonstrating those values in any way, shape or form, then they are just a poster on the wall. So teaching managers how to lead with the culture in mind that you want to create, I think is really, really important.
Great. So some practical takeaways then for individuals. There's various backgrounds, I think, on the call, various different job roles and organisations are working with. But if people just now listening are facing a merger or something like LGR or that type of thing, then what could they and should they be doing now that would help at this minute in time?
So I would say it does depend on where you are in the process. I think there's a few things. The first thing is really be aware of that sense of identity loss, and really try to unpick what that actually means, because it does mean different things in different organisations, but it's something to be aware of, and it's okay to acknowledge that it's disproportionate, because I think some senior leaders, particularly when you go through mergers, the people most at risk personally, the people carrying the most risk personally are your senior people, because often when you go through mergers, you are looking to kind of streamline and reduce your management structure. So they can get dismissive of it because they will be feeling, we're going through all this here. I'm the one who's most at risk, not you. So shut up and put up, because, you're going to be fine because we've still got the same number of bins to empty. And I totally get that, and that is valid. However, that's where we need to remember that it's disproportionate. It is a disproportionate impact. So being aware of that, I think, is really important. I think understanding your own culture is really, really important. So, that example I gave of the organisation that said that they felt they were the best, they knew that to some degree. And often my reports that I do and the presentations I do about culture, people say this is not a surprise. What you found is not a surprise, but the framing it in, but actually this is what the underlying assumption means, and this is where that may hold you back, is very, very powerful. So for them, being aware of that means that actually they're now reflecting on their own leadership styles, their own communication, because for a number of years their senior leaders and their comms has been supporting that. We are the best, because of course you would say that, because of course you want your people to feel proud. So it's a case of getting to that point where you really understand your own, so you can start to see where there might be things that hold you back, or things that might hold your staff back from the transition. The other side to that coin is, if you can, absolutely do the same exercise with the people that you're going to be merging with, because what that allows you to do is then get a sense of, okay, so this organisation A is really quite risk averse, organisation B is really people focused and doesn't care about process. So when you put those two together, that's going to be a clash. You might have one organisation that's really fast paced and gets stuff done, and you might have another organisation where they are more thoughtful. And there's no right or wrong, and particularly in local government, some of these cultural differences arise because, firstly, of different leaders, but secondly, of different kind of localities and different community challenges. There might be different things going on in one place than another that mean that they have to adapt the style of the organisation. But getting awareness about that so that you can talk about it before you get to the point of merging is very, very powerful. And you can start to shift the dial on some of those things so that it doesn't feel like such a shock. So I think that's really important. And I think it's really, really important that your middle to senior managers understand this level of transition, because, as I said before, they can be a bit dismissive, it can be challenging for them. Also, there's a lot of work to do by that group of people. So those of you that are going through processes like this at the moment, you'll probably have program boards, you'll probably have tons of work on top of your business as usual, you'll probably have, really harsh deadlines of getting data and information together. So it's really easy under all that pressure for behaviours to slip a little bit, to get a little bit snappy, to forget about the people side, because the government's given us this deadline and we have to get that over the line, and there's lawyers working on it and it's high stakes. So that's why I think that investment in the middle to senior managers, so that they are prepared for that and they have that awareness, is really, really powerful. And I also think it's worth, in an ideal world, if you had 3 organisations coming together, you'd want to each of them to do a culture review now so that you see the clashes, and then redo that exercise after you've come together, maybe a year after, so that you can see how they've merged and where some of the pinch points and problems are.
Okay. Question for Tess. Tess, I've been wondering for a while if it would be helpful to dial up our sense of being here as public servants, which is a common bond with all those in local authorities and councils, in which we take with us into new roles within this sector.
That is a really good point, and I have actually recommended that to a council. Last week I submitted a culture review, and they have, to be honest, I think most councils that I work with, the staff have a great sense of purpose, because the money isn't great in local government. the stress levels are quite high. So you tend to stay in the sector because you feel passionately about it. And yeah, one of the things that I have put in like a staged recommendation plan is between now and vesting day, instead of talking about the organisation, really start talking about the sense of purpose, about the work that you're doing with community, because that is the thing that ties people together. So yeah, that's a really good shout. It really is.
Okay. Any other questions at all? Or anybody wants to share anything in terms of your own experience of merger or culture shifts within mergers or anything like that, please do drop that into the comments. But yeah, please do ask. And thanks Tess for that question. Lucy, something I was thinking about just as you were talking there. We we talk about them and us, or we hear it mentioned them and us within councils in terms of maybe leadership, management towards leadership, staff towards managers, towards leaders, etc. Is that something you come across quite a lot when you're doing the culture reviews? You do obviously a lot of the workshops we spoke about, and you're speaking to everybody within the organisation. Is that something that comes up quite a bit? And how do you address that if there is that them and us mentality and there is that divide?
So yeah, it is really common. So there is a model called, it connects with identity a little bit. There's a model called social identity theory, which basically means, and it explains a lot of human behaviour, a lot of bad human behaviour to be fair. But we are a bit tribal by nature. We grew up in small communities and we survived over the millions of years that we've been here. Is it millions? I feel like it is. Based on our ability to form connections with people. So it's quite deeply ingrained in us, this sense of, I want to form a group. I want to form a group, and this is my group, and that's your group, and this is what's different about my group. Your group is different. So that's really quite deeply held within us. And in some ways that's really positive. So when you get it right, we all talk about the importance of team dynamics and creating a sense of team and creating a sense of dynamic, a sense of identity. When it goes a little bit too far, it gets very toxic. And again, with these sorts of situations, that's a fire that we're pouring petrol on. So a recent review where we did pull out that them and us, it's playing out in different ways. So it can play out between service delivery, like children's social care, place-based work, highways and depots, versus corporate centre, which is their terminology really, in terms of like there's this group of people that are far away from us, that are in the middle, that are making all the decisions, and they don't understand us. That's fairly common, and you'll have that whether you're going through a merger or not, but it's how far it goes. It also came out in terms of legacy council. So, you were from a district, you were from such a place, you were from the county, them and us, in terms of those different organisations that you were from. And it also comes out in terms of actual place and geography, because a lot of organisations that we work with are quite big and across a big geographical area, and will have multiple sites, and sites create microcultures. That matters less in organisations where it's more hybrid and people are working from home, because that's created a little bit of a leveler, but on the other side of that spectrum it's also created a little bit of a distance. So yeah, them and us is a real issue, and it's a real tricky art form to get it right, where you have enough of the them and us that people feel that sense of community. And we do have something as well called proximity bias, which means that we form relationships with people that we see more, we trust people that we see more. When we're in proximity to others, we have a little bit of a bias there, and we like them. And we hear a lot in organisations when we ask these sorts of questions that we do, that well, I like my team and I like my manager and we all get on really well, but it's when we try and deal with them over there, we can't get stuff done. So yeah, it is really, really common, and it is a tricky balance. When it goes over the line of being structured, it goes over the line of being toxic, it can become very problematic very quickly.
Yeah. A couple of questions, Lucy. So Sherelle, forgive me if I've not pronounced your name properly. A good question and relevant. Hi Lucy, how do you sustain a strong culture when so much is unclear? That's a very good question. And topical, there's so much unknown in LGR. Yep, definitely down to even who we will be merging with. And I worry this creates distrust and people think leaders know more than they do. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and I am seeing that play out. In fact, I did a review in a council down south about 4 weeks ago. I was at one of their depots, and what should have been a very independent me collecting data almost turned into them interrogating me because I was an outsider. And I was very honest and said, I'm not involved in your LGR process. I'm just here to do this piece of work culture. So I'm not part of like your programme board or anything. But here is what I can tell you about what other councils have gone through. And one of the phrases that they said was, I just don't believe that they don't know what's going to happen. I just don't believe. And I was like, but I'm working with a council that's 3 years post LGR and they don't know yet. So why would you think that your council that hasn't gone through it yet would know now? So there is definitely that mistrust, and we are doing a follow-up intervention for that council, particularly with their depot. It is difficult, and there's a lot of research around uncertainty, and there are individual differences. So there is a spectrum in terms of our tolerance for uncertainty, and you'll see this in your personal and professional life. Some people can tolerate uncertainty more than others. I am taking my mother away for a couple of days next week. My tolerance for uncertainty is a lot higher than hers, and it's driving me mad because I'm having to almost do an itinerary for her of where we're going to be at what time, because she cannot tolerate that level of uncertainty of let's just go away and see what happens. So we do have these like differences. I think it's about being as honest as we can about when we will know stuff, because certainly a reflection from a counsellor I was with this week when we were walking through their post-LGR, they said that they wished that they'd been more realistic and more honest, because what they did in the run-up, it becomes so easy. It's like a wedding. It's like we get obsessed with the day, and then you wake up the next day and you've got the rest of your lives together. And they kind of psyched everybody up for, we're going to fix this after vesting day. And now 3 years after vesting day, a lot of the stuff wasn't fixed and was never going to be fixed that quickly. You can't merge organisational IT systems overnight. So I think there's something about the honesty about that level of uncertainty and where the uncertainty is, but also again back to the point about really focusing on the sense of purpose and where the practical change is and when that will happen. Because I come back to, for the vast majority of staff, I've heard it compared to like the millennium bug that we all got up on that morning and thought the computers were all going to blow up, and they didn't. Not that much changes. You might have a new lanyard, but in reality, the real change happens after, not before. But I know that is a difficult message for people because they don't necessarily believe it. It's a good question. Thank you.
On the subject of LGR again, and thanks Claire for this question, do you think we should be starting to work on the culture now, prior to the LGR announcement in the summer, or wait until after the announcement is made when it's clear who will join with who? That's a very relevant question, Claire, that we also get asked quite a lot.
Yeah, and it'll be no surprise to you that, my view is just start it as soon as possible. And if there's a way of doing it across the whole region, do it across the whole region. So we're speaking to a number of regions at the moment that are looking at doing a culture review across the whole region, regardless of what the outcome is of the government's decision. The reason why I have the view to do it as early as possible is because it gives you more time to think about it and prepare it and really start to shift the dial. Because in some cases, you can start to think about shifting those dials before you know what the outcome is. Because if you know that you have a culture that's particularly people focused and they're about to go through a journey where it's all about action and pace and activity, then you need to be shifting that dial now. I worked with a council where they were very strong people focused, really positive, lovely culture. But they reflected and said, we don't really use deadlines because we don't need to, because everybody trusts each other and everybody gets stuff done. And we're now going to go through this process where there's going to be some really tough deadlines, and people will feel like, because they've been given a deadline, that the trust is eroding, when in actual fact it's just the practicalities of getting this over the line. So I think the sooner you have the awareness about your organisation, the quicker you can start to prepare people for transition. Then, after you've got the decision, that's when you can sit down and compare and contrast. Okay, so this organisation, is very risk averse. This organisation isn't. This organisation is very people focused. This organisation is very fast paced. How do we start to level the playing field and get these people collaborating before vesting day? So my personal view is to do it as quickly as possible. What I'm seeing out on the field is a real is a difference. So some councils, I've done this exercise in ones that have already merged because they want to do that post work. I've done it in councils that are waiting for the business outcome, the business case outcome, and I've done it for ones that have got the business case outcome. So it does seem to be down to perhaps a headspace and budget issue. But from a psychology point of view, do it as quick as you can. The more information you've got about the people, the earlier in the process, the better prepared they will be.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thanks for that question, Claire. A question from Cara. I've got a couple of questions we'll try and get through here. From Cara, really interested to hear any thoughts on how, during processes like LGR, where the organisation understand the need to be focused on safe and legal aspects, how can we get across the need to focus on culture? It's often referred to as the fluffier stuff. Yes, you're right, Cara, but it's actually the make or break of new, well-functioning organisations. What do you think we need to be reflecting back to our senior leaders to make sure that they also get it?
It is really true, and it is really tough as well because so I did a piece of research which I will look up the link on our website, or if you could just look that up, Fraser, while I'm talking. So we've got like a 30-minute video on our website which summarises a piece of research that I did, that I interviewed about 40 people that had been through the process of LGR, and one of the main findings was we should have done the people stuff a lot earlier than we did. We really should have done it, because the safe and legal stuff is absolutely important, and it is high stakes, and it is reputationally high stakes, and it is also a government driven agenda. However, you're right to say that if during that process it's so chaotic and everybody upsets everybody, then when you go live, you will really, really struggle to go live in a good place. So we can post it in the chat. If you can't find it, Fraser, I'll find it. You've got it. That is a good 30-minute. This is what the interviews have told us. This is what people have said. This is the reflection. So that may help you with that evidence base. And I'm happy if anybody on the call wants to, pick my brains or me to have a conversation with leaders in your organisation about what I'm seeing elsewhere, then I'm very happy to. I think the level of maturity around leaders understanding culture has increased recently. I might be biased because obviously I'm going to speak to people that are into it. The people that aren't into it probably aren't talking to me, but I have noticed a shift and people are realising it. And the other thing is, for some sort of chief execs, some of this is a legacy issue. So the way I'd have that conversation would be, this is about you taking care of your people as they go through this process. That's really important. You want this council to end well, so that can sometimes just tap into something that maybe when they've got all the chaos of the deadlines, that can help.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought that was the second thing there. Maybe you can get it.
Okay.
Question from Jenny. Thank you. How can you support people who may be even more impacted by ambiguity, change? For example, people who experience trauma and people with neurodiversity. How can they be supported?
So I'm not an expert in neurodiversity, I will say. I'm not a particular expert in that. I'd come back to what I said earlier about there are those different tolerances to uncertainty. There is a really good model that's not particularly for neurodiversity, but is for everyone, that I think is useful, where we basically need three things to do well in the workplace. So we need a sense of autonomy. We don't like being told what to do. We need good relationships with our colleagues, and we need a sense of competence. Most people want to feel like they're doing a good job. And the problem with mergers and LGR is they impact all three. So we suddenly don't have any autonomy because we've been told we've got to do it. We suddenly don't know about our relationships because we don't know who we're going to be working with. And we're suddenly being compared about who does this the best way. So as a general rule, and I don't just use this for this kind of situation, I use that tool for a lot of different ways of doing change and transformation. If you can focus people on those three things, and you can make sure that you are delivering messages and change in a way that taps into those three things, then that's really helpful. And the best way to do that is a lot of co-production. Now, you can't co-produce the big stuff and the what, but there's nothing to stop you whatsoever getting, say waste services, people together from waste services from 3 or 4 different councils, and starting to have that, oh, how do you do it? All right, we do it like this, and start building those relationships and start getting people to shape the way that they work. I think the process of LGR is extraordinarily disempowering. So giving people that empowerment to start talking and shaping stuff allows them to focus less on what is uncertain and out of their control, and more on what they can shape and what they can influence, which is good for people's mindsets.
Okay. Maybe time for one more question. Question from Tess. Tess, is there a danger in trying to create a new culture too early during the LGR process? Might you lose people if they're presented with a new set of espoused values, behaviours from day one? That's a bit of a sticking point for Tess right now. Thanks, Tess.
Sorry, I was just posting a link. I'm just going to post that again because I think I've accidentally put a hashtag on the end of it. So again, I was thinking about this last week with a particular organisation. So you've got this weird overlap in the middle. So you've got the getting ready for it, then you've got a period of time where you actually recruit to, the new chief exec, the cabinet, the new kind of, and they call it the shadow people. I don't know what the right terminology is there. They will be in post before vesting day. So from the interviews that I've done, that wasn't done very early, and those people end up focusing very much on the safe and legal. What I would be doing in the run up to vesting day is I'd be doing a lot of staff engagement on what do you want the values to be of the new organisation. And you don't necessarily need your new chief exec in place in order to do that. But I would be doing the engagement, because it's actually linked to what I said for the last question, that triangle of giving people that autonomy, those relationships and that competence, getting people so that they can, start to meet who the future colleague is going to be and start to talk about values and start to talk about culture. The actual reality of the new organisational culture will take years to build. But what you're doing is you're warming up to it in the run up to it. So I would say loads of staff engagement.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. We're almost out of time, so we better wrap things up. Thank you, Lucy, as always, for your expertise and insight. I hope everybody found that very useful and you've got some helpful takeaways relevant to whatever you're all going through just now. There seems to be a lot going on, so yeah, I hope that's been useful. If you do want to continue the conversation, I always say, Lucy and I have started many engagements and client relationships with and on the back of the Change Chat. So please, if you want to talk a bit more about the culture reviews that we do and you want to find out a wee bit more about the value they bring and what they are and how we go about them, then please just reach out to me. I'll send an email on the back of this with my contact details and obviously with the recording as promised. I would draw your attention to the next Change Chat. Please, would love you to join that as well. I'll put a link to it in the chat. That is on the 6th of June, I think I put on there. Is that right? Yeah, how teams support each other through LGR. So that's a wee bit more LGR focus for those going through that on June the 5th at 12. So please do join us for that. And Lucy, yeah, just once again, thank you. And yeah, look forward to welcoming you on the next Change Chat. And as I say, please do reach out if you want to continue the conversation with us. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much. And yes, Tracy, I'm in Staffordshire this week on the way of taking my mum away for a few days. So coming and speaking to you now, guys, will be a welcome distraction from all of the uncertainty management I'm doing with my mum. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all soon.